He wasn't supposed to be there that night. The child crying in the dark wasn't his. The house wasn't his. The life unraveling quietly around him definitely wasn't his responsibility. Yet there he stood at 3 in the morning, rocking a newborn in his arms while the woman in the next room, his best friend's widow, cried softly into her hands. He had come to help for a few days. He stayed for months. What began as loyalty to a dead friend slowly turned into something far more dangerous. A bond with no name, no permission, and no clear ending. Because loving a child that isn't yours changes you. And loving the mother of that child when you're not meant to? That can cost you everything. Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe to The Spoken Pen. And tell us in the comments which part of the world you're watching from. Now this is how it all started. Some responsibilities arrive with paperwork and planning. Others arrive quietly, without warning, and change your life before you understand what's happening. Mark never planned to stay. He told himself that as he packed a small overnight bag. He told himself that as he drove through unfamiliar streets under a low gray sky. He was only there because it felt wrong not to be. When someone you've known most of your adult life disappears suddenly, you show up, whether you're ready or not. The house felt heavier than he expected. Not empty, just careful, as if every sound had learned to whisper. Mark stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure whether to knock again or turn back. Before he could decide, the door opened. Emily looked smaller than he remembered. Not physically, something deeper. Like grief had folded her inward. She wore an oversized sweater, sleeves pulled past her hands. Her hair was loosely tied back, strands falling around a face that hadn't slept properly in weeks. Dark circles framed her eyes, and when she looked at him, she paused as if making sure he was real. Then she stepped aside and let him in. They didn't hug. They didn't smile. They didn't know how. The living room still smelled faintly of baby powder and dust. A folded blanket rested on the couch. A stuffed animal sat crooked on the floor, one ear bent from use. Mark swallowed. He had known Daniel for nearly 15 years. College roommates, road trips, late-night talks about life and the future. Daniel was the steady one, the planner, the man who believed if you did things right, life would reward you. Daniel was gone. 3 months earlier, an illness that moved too fast. A hospital stay that ended with a phone call no one was prepared to receive. Emily had been 8 months pregnant. Mark still remembered her voice on the phone that night. Flat, controlled, as if letting emotion through would shatter something she couldn't afford to lose. They sat at the kitchen table, 2 untouched mugs between them. Emily stared at her hands. Mark stared at the clock. Finally, Emily spoke. She said she didn't know what she was doing anymore. She said the house felt wrong without Daniel. She said she was terrified of becoming a mother when she still felt like she was falling apart. Mark told her she wasn't failing. The words felt small the moment they left his mouth. Emily nodded politely, like someone humoring a kind lie. The baby arrived 2 weeks later. Mark stayed longer than he planned. First, it was practical. Emily needed help. Someone to drive her home from the hospital. Someone to lift things she shouldn't touch. Someone to sit quietly during appointments and not say the wrong thing. Mark told himself it was temporary. He told himself he was just being a friend. He told himself he would leave once things settled. But life doesn't settle on schedule. The baby cried a lot. Late nights blurred into early mornings. Exhaustion settled into the walls. Mark learned how to warm bottles without thinking, how to change diapers in the dark, how to hold a tiny body that felt impossibly fragile. Emily watched him sometimes from the doorway. She never asked him to do any of it. He never explained why he did. They existed side by side, carrying different kinds of grief. Some nights Emily cried in the shower. She thought the water hid the sound. It didn't. Mark sat on the edge of the bed those nights, staring at the wall, listening without moving. He didn't know how to comfort her. He didn't know what words could touch a loss that deep. So he stayed. And somehow, staying became its own kind of promise. Weeks turned into months. The baby grew stronger, louder, more present. Emily grew quieter, not weaker, just guarded. Mark noticed the way she avoided photographs, the way she flinched when someone said Daniel's name, the way she thanked him too often, as if afraid he might disappear if she didn't. One night, after putting the baby to sleep, Emily asked him why he was still there. Not accusing, not emotional, just honest. Mark opened his mouth to answer and stopped, because the truth had changed without asking him. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped thinking of the baby as Daniel's child. The cries no longer felt like noise. They felt like a call. The weight in his arms felt familiar, necessary, like something he was meant to carry. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't chosen it. But he was there. And he wasn't leaving. One quiet afternoon, Emily watched Mark rocking the baby to sleep. Her expression softened in a way he hadn't seen before, almost afraid. She whispered that the baby smiled more when Mark held him. Mark felt his chest tighten, because for the first time he understood what that meant. And for the first time he realized how dangerous that understanding could be. Mark began noticing the silence before he noticed anything else. Not the peaceful kind, the careful kind, the kind that fills a room when people are thinking the same things but pretending they're not. The house had developed that silence over time, settling into it the way dust settles on unused shelves. Mornings became routine. The baby woke early. Emily followed, moving quietly, as if sound itself might undo her. Mark stayed back at first, listening, telling himself to give her space. But the cries never lasted long before he found himself standing in the doorway again. Not invited, not turned away, just there. Emily never looked surprised to see him. That might have been the first sign something had changed. They didn't talk about what he was doing there anymore. At some point, the explanation stopped. There was no discussion about timelines, no plan for when Mark would leave. His bag stayed unpacked in the guest room. His toothbrush remained by the sink. His shoes lined up neatly by the door. The house had quietly accepted him. Emily hadn't said it out loud, but she had started relying on him in ways that scared her. She trusted him with the baby without hesitation, trusted him with the grocery lists, trusted him to notice when she was too tired to keep pretending she was okay. Trust can feel like relief at first. Then it becomes something heavier. One evening, Mark came home later than usual. Emily didn't ask where he'd been, but she noticed. She noticed the pause in his step when he walked in, the way his jacket stayed on a second too long, the way he checked the baby before meeting her eyes. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. She didn't push. That was the rule they had both learned: don't push. Don't ask questions you might not survive the answers to. Sometimes, when the baby slept, they sat on opposite ends of the couch. The television stayed on, volume low, neither of them watching. Their conversations were safe. Work, weather, appointments, anything that didn't touch the past or threaten the future. But sometimes their knees brushed. Sometimes their hands reached for the same mug. Sometimes they both noticed, and neither moved away. Those moments lingered long after they passed. Mark tried to set boundaries. He told himself he would stop staying up so late, stop fixing things that didn't need fixing, stop noticing the way Emily's voice changed when she laughed, or how she leaned into the baby when she was overwhelmed. But boundaries are harder to maintain when no one asks you to cross them. Emily never asked, and Mark never stopped. One afternoon, Emily's mother came by unexpectedly. She was kind, well-meaning, and observant in the way only parents can be. She watched Mark move through the house as if he belonged there. She noticed how the baby calmed instantly in his arms. Later in the kitchen, she pulled Emily aside. "You're lucky to have him," she said quietly. "Not many people would stay." Emily nodded, but the word stay echoed in her chest long after her mother left. That night, Emily stood in the doorway of Mark's room. She didn't knock. She didn't step inside. She just stood there, holding something she couldn't name. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. Mark looked up slowly. "Yes," he said. It wasn't a lie. She waited. He didn't explain. Neither of them breathed until she finally nodded and walked away. Later, Mark sat alone, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Daniel, about loyalty, about guilt, about how love doesn't always arrive the way it's supposed to. He wondered if staying was kindness or cowardice. The baby cried just after midnight. Emily didn't wake. Mark went automatically. He held the child against his chest, whispering words he didn't realize he'd learned. The baby settled quickly, tiny fingers curling into Mark's shirt like they belonged there. Mark closed his eyes, and in that moment the fear finally caught up to him, because he knew something now. This wasn't temporary, and walking away one day would hurt far more than staying ever had. In the hallway, Emily watched from the shadows. She saw the way Mark held her child, and for the first time since Daniel died, she felt something terrifying. Hope. Change rarely announces itself. It slips in quietly, disguised as routine, until one day you realize you're living a life you never agreed to but can no longer imagine leaving. Mark noticed it the morning he instinctively reached for the baby before Emily did. She was standing right there, awake, capable, yet he moved first. Emily watched him without comment, her expression unreadable. She didn't look offended. She didn't look relieved. She looked scared. The world outside the house kept moving. Friends called less often. Invitations slowed. Life reorganized itself around new assumptions neither of them had confirmed out loud. When someone referred to Mark as the dad, Emily corrected them too quickly. Mark laughed it off too casually, but the word stayed with them both. Daniel's parents visited one Sunday afternoon. They meant well. Everyone always meant well. They brought gifts, memories, and stories Emily wasn't ready to hear. They talked about Daniel as if he were still supposed to be there, as if his absence were temporary. Mark stayed quiet, respectful, invisible, until the baby cried. Emily moved instinctively, but Mark was already there. Daniel's mother noticed. She smiled politely, but something shifted behind her eyes. Later, as they were leaving, she hugged Emily tightly. Then she turned to Mark. "You've done a lot," she said. "But remember, this isn't your place." The words weren't cruel. They were honest, and they cut deeper than anger ever could. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He replayed the sentence over and over. "This isn't your place." He wondered when it had started to feel like it was. Emily noticed his distance the next day. He answered questions politely but briefly. He avoided lingering glances. He busied himself with tasks that didn't need doing. That evening, she finally asked what was wrong. Mark hesitated. Then he told her what Daniel's mother had said. Emily's face tightened. She didn't mean. Emily started, then stopped. Because they both knew she probably had. They stood in the kitchen, the baby asleep between them on the monitor. Mark spoke carefully. "I don't want to confuse things," he said. "For you. For him." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. "Confuse what?" she asked. The question hung between them. Mark didn't answer. That silence said everything. Emily didn't sleep that night either. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past year. Every kindness, every shared glance, every time Mark had stayed when he didn't have to. She realized something she had been avoiding. Mark hadn't just helped her survive. He had become part of her life. And losing him now would feel like losing someone all over again. The breaking point came quietly. A school form. Father's name. Emily stared at the blank space for a long time. Her hand hovered over the paper. She didn't write Mark's name. But she didn't write Daniel's either. That evening, Emily found Mark on the back porch. The sky was dark. The house behind them was quiet. "I don't know how to do this without you," she said. Mark closed his eyes. "That's the problem," he replied softly. Emily felt tears rise, uninvited and unstoppable. "Do you want to leave?" she asked. Mark shook his head. "No." "Then why does it feel like you already are?" He didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt her. For the first time, Emily reached for him. Not dramatically, not desperately. She simply placed her hand over his. Mark froze. In that moment, everything became dangerously clear. What they were pretending not to feel. What they were both afraid to admit. What staying any longer would eventually demand from them. Mark pulled his hand away. Not because he didn't want her, but because he wanted her too much. That night he packed his bag. Emily watched silently from the doorway. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't explain. He just paused at the door, long enough to let the weight of everything they hadn't said settle between them. Then he left. The baby cried as the door closed. Emily didn't follow. She sat on the floor holding her child, finally understanding the cost of pretending nothing had changed. The house felt different without Mark. Not louder, not emptier, just unfinished. Emily noticed it in the small things first. The way the door no longer clicked open at the same time each evening. The way the baby stared toward the hallway as if expecting someone who wasn't coming. The way silence now pressed instead of hovered. She told herself it was better this way. Cleaner, simpler, safer. But grief has a way of returning when you least expect it, especially the kind you thought you had already survived. Days turned into weeks. Emily learned how to manage alone again. She did the grocery shopping, fixed what she could, left what she couldn't. She smiled politely when people told her how strong she was. Strength, she learned, is often mistaken for silence. At night, after the baby slept, she sat with thoughts she could no longer avoid. She thought about Daniel, and then, unavoidably, she thought about Mark. Not in comparison, not in replacement, but in truth. One afternoon, the baby said his first word. It wasn't Mama. It wasn't Dada. It was a soft, imperfect sound that sounded almost like Ma-R-K. Emily laughed, then froze. She didn't cry, but something inside her settled. Mark tried to return to the life he'd paused. Work filled his days. Noise filled his evenings. Friends invited him out, and he said yes even when he didn't want to. He told himself distance was the right thing. He told himself love sometimes means leaving. But late at night, when distractions failed, the truth came back. He missed the weight of a child falling asleep against his chest. He missed Emily's quiet strength. He missed the life that had almost become his. Almost. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday. Emily didn't rehearse what she would say. She didn't need to. "I can't do this without you," she said. Mark closed his eyes. "You already are," he replied. "That's the problem," she whispered. "I don't want to." There was no drama in her voice. No desperation. Just honesty. They met at a park near her house. Neutral ground. Safe ground. The baby laughed when he saw Mark. That sound broke something open. Mark knelt and held him, and the familiarity returned instantly, as if no time had passed at all. Emily watched quietly. "I'm not asking you to replace anyone," she said. "I never wanted that." "I know," Mark answered. "I'm asking if you're willing to choose us," she continued. "Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because this is where you want to be." Mark stood slowly. For the first time, the choice felt clear. Love, he realized, doesn't erase the past. It makes room for it. He thought of Daniel not with guilt but with gratitude. For the life he'd lived. For the family he'd begun. For trusting Mark enough to have unknowingly left something precious in his care. Mark looked at Emily. "I'm here," he said. "If you'll have me." She nodded. That was enough. They didn't rush. They didn't pretend it was simple. They built carefully, honestly, with respect for what had been lost and hope for what could still be created. The child grew, knowing love not as replacement but as presence. And one day, when someone asked him who Mark was, he answered easily, "My dad." Not because of blood, but because of choice. Some love stories begin with fireworks. This one began with grief, patience, and the courage to stay when leaving would have been easier. And that made all the difference.